All right, so welcome to the second video for our plant module. With this video, we're going to pick up our discussion and talk about the non-vascular plants and then the vascular plants that are seedless. And then in our next video, we'll go through and talk about our seed plants, our seed vascular plants. And so basically the evolution of plants kind of followed in this progression, where the first terrestrial land plants were these smaller non-vascular plants known as the bryophytes. And so the bryophytes were the first plants to actually appear on land. And then later on, you get the development or the evolution of vascular plants. So vascular tissues evolved in these plants, and those vascular tissues are structures like xylem and phloem that carry water and nutrients throughout the plants. And the vascular plants were the second grouping of plants to appear, and these plants appeared about 450 million years ago. And these plants were also seedless, just like the bryophytes. And examples of these seedless vascular plants are lycophytes and pteridophytes. So, like your ferns and horsetails are examples of these types of plants. And then after the evolution of your vascular seedless plants, we then start seeing the development, the evolution of the gymnosperms, which are your conifer plants, that now produce seeds. So we now have these vascular plants that are generating seeds. But the seeds for conifers are what we refer to as naked seeds, meaning that they're exposed to the outer environment because they're in these cones. And these cones don't really keep the seeds enclosed from the environment. We don't see enclosed seeds until we get to angiosperms, which are the more recent plants to evolve, and these are our flowering plants. These type of plants, they protect their seeds inside chambers that are located at the center of a flower, and we'll talk about those specific structures in the next video. And those chambers are what develop into the fruits. And again, we'll talk all about those structures whenever we talk about gymnosperms and angiosperms in the next video. But for this video, we're going to really focus on the bryophytes and the vascular seedless plants, which are the lycophytes and the pteridophytes. So here we have the land plants, all of the land plants and their major groupings. We have our non-vascular bryophytes, which are things like mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. Then you have your seedless vascular plants, which again are things like your lycophytes, which are quillworts, your spike mosses, club mosses, your pteridophytes, which are whisk ferns and horsetails, and then your regular ferns like you see in a grocery store, not grocery store, but Lowe's. Some grocery stores sell ferns, so like Save Mart and those types of things. But it's like your Boston fern that you may see hanging on a patio at somebody's house or even at your house. And then you have your seed vascular plants, which are your gymnosperms and your angiosperms. So that's the major division of plants. Now, first, we're going to talk about seedless plants and when they first appeared. So first seedless plants appeared about 490 million years ago and really dominated the landscape around 300 million years ago. And they make up the coal that we actually mine today. So the remnants of those plants are what we are burning as coal. And there was approximately 18,000 different species of bryophytes, or I'm sorry, your seedless plants. Um, and those species grew in a variety of different environments. So places like your tundra, your moist environments, and even your dry desert environments. And so the first seedless plants that originated in the terrestrial environment again were the bryophytes. And the bryophytes are really unique because they can live in these inhospitable environments. And so they can live on like these soil deprived environments, like on rocks, and they can really start soil formation processes. And if you've got an ecosystem that's been devastated by like a volcano or a flood or a tsunami, bryophytes can actually do really well in those type of environments. And they also can live in really cold environments too. And so making up the bryophytes are species or are groups like your liverworts, your hornworts, and your mosses. Liverworts, you have about 6,000 species, only about 100 species of hornworts, and you got about 12,000 species of mosses. And mosses are really important because you ever seen a moss growing, right? You've seen it growing in kind of these patches or like these beds on the ground on the soil surface, and they're really compact, and you can almost peel up the moss mat, right? And so that type of growth really slows down erosion, but it also allows for nutrients and moisture to be stored in those mats. And they also provide shelter for small animals. A lot of small animals will live inside those mossy patches. But they're also really sensitive to air pollution. And so we can use the presence or absence of mosses as kind of indicators for what's happening in the surrounding environment. So here's an example of horsetails shown in this image. You actually can go up into the Sierras in the higher elevations and actually find horsetails. There's one place that we really like to go camping near Kennedy Meadows, and whenever we're out, just like walking along the Stanislaus River, you see horsetails on the riverbank all over the place there. And these types of plants, these seedless plants like the horsetails, are part of the bryophyte. I'm sorry, they're not part of the bryophyte grouping. I have no idea why these are on here, because if you remember, the horsetails are actually a pteridiophyte. So this is an error in my slides, and I'm just talking on and on about horsetails whenever we're not even talking about that group yet. So I apologize. And so yeah, well, you can remember all that as we talk about pteridiophytes in a few minutes. But so bryophytes, that's what we're talking about. Um, so these seedless, non-vascular plants are they have a gametophyte dominant life stage, meaning that they are haplontic. And so whenever you see that organism growing, so if you look at a moss plant, a moss mat, you are looking at the gametophyte life stage. And then if you get in a little closer and you examine the moss, depending on the season, you may see little spore capsules growing out of the green leafy structures on those moss plants. And those spore capsules are going to be the sporophyte portion of the life stage. And with bryophytes, all of the groupings, they have to have water for the gamete to swim to the egg for fertilization. If you don't have water, then that's not possible. And so here are pictures of bryophytes. So these are actually bryophytes, unlike our last image. So again, just remember, horsetails aren't part of the bryophyte grouping. That image was in the wrong place. So here we have drawings of liverworts on the left-hand side here. So these are some drawings of liverworts. This is a liverwort here. So you see the thallus leafy-like structures. And then out of those leafy structures, you have the sporophyte stage growing. So this structure here is the sporophyte stage, the diploid stage, whereas these leafy thallus structures are the gametophyte stage. And so these sporophytes are dependent on those leafy structures, the gametophyte, to grow. So we actually say that these are sporophyte dependent, or I'm sorry, gametophyte dependent structures. Okay. Here we have a hornwort that's growing out. So you have, again, the sporophytes growing out of those leafy gametophyte structures. So all of these leafy structures are the gametophytes, and then these structures growing out are the sporophyte structures. And here's a moss. So again, the leafy structures are your gametophytes. That's the dominant, the gametophyte dominant. Then these capsules are the sporophyte structures, and then your spores are in here. And so they'll be released and they'll grow into more of these leafy structures shown in the image. And so again, these are gametophyte dominant organisms, and so they have a haplontic life stage, or a haplontic dominant life cycle. All right, so next we're going to talk about your vascular seedless plants. So the vascular seedless plants have that vascular system which the bryophytes do not have. But they still need water for fertilization. So they favor really moist environments. And so that's why you see ferns growing in your kind of moister environment. So when you think of ferns growing, or at least I do, I think of kind of your moist, kind of like like Seattle rainforest type habitats where it rains quite a bit and water is available for that fertilization process to happen. And so what's different with these groups of plants, unlike bryophytes, they have the xylem and phloem, have those vascular structures. And so we said that the groupings for the seedless vascular plants are the lycophytes and the pteridiophytes. The lycophytes are made up of club mosses, quillworts, and spike mosses. So here's is a picture of a club moss. Okay. And about 300 million years ago, there were forests of these types of species. So these species can kind of grow into tree-like structures. So you have like these tree moss, these tree ferns, basically. And now again, we're digging up coal deposits that are made from the organic material of these types of organisms. And then the other grouping, like we mentioned, was the pteridiophytes, which is where the horsetails are found. And again, horsetails are found in those damp environments, which is why we see them up in the northern Sierras where they're on the banks of the rivers, like I was telling you about, where we see them up around Kennedy Meadows on the bank of the Stanislaus River. These types of plants were really dominant in the Carboniferous period. And so you have like your horsetails, your ferns, you can have whisk ferns. And I believe we have an image. I'll show it to you in a second. But what's interesting about whisk ferns is that they actually lack roots and leaves. And horsetails actually have modified stem structures that serve as their leafy like structures. And so again, here's that horsetail image. So we see these growing in a marsh here. Here's a horsetail plant that is growing out of the soil. And all of those leafy structures there are modified leaves that are growing. Pretty cool looking. And here is actually a tree fern species that can grow really tall. And this is kind of what I think about growing when I think about, like, those images with the giant insects and the animals from 300 million years ago that are roaming around like these fern mossy landscapes. So this is like the tall tree fern that you would see drawn in those images there. So again, from the Carboniferous period, which is where these would have been, or when these would have been dominant. So this image here is just showing the geological time scale where these plants would have really dominated. So from about 410 million years ago to about 290 million years ago. So Devonian and Carboniferous period, um, which is when these would have been more dominant on the landscape. Okay. And so that does it for our second video in this module, where we have discussed the seedless um, um, plants and the seedless vascular plants. In our next video, we're going to discuss the vascular seed plants and the evolution of seeds. And we're going to talk about the gymnosperms, and we'll talk about angiosperms and the development of flowers and fruits, and how that was really important in allowing angiosperms to really proliferate and become the dominant plant type we see on the landscape today. And so with that, we will see you in the next video.